Have you ever been told your psoas is too tight but find no relief with constantly stretching it? Or maybe you've been told it's too weak but find it only creates more discomfort when you try to strengthen it. Well, come join me to learn a bit more about how to create length and strength in your psoas for long-lasting relief. The psoas is an amazing muscle that connects our upper body to our lower body, inserting at the anterior aspects of each lumbar vertebra and then attaching to the lesser trochanter at the femur. It shares fascial connections with our posterior diaphragm, working together with our abs to help stabilize the spine proximally. Distally, it keeps the femur back in the socket and acts as a primary hip flexor. Because of this, it plays a key role in both postural stabilization as well as dynamic control. It often gets a bad rap of being too tight, too dominant, or too weak. But before we jump straight into stretching or strengthening, we need to make sure it has the setting and support team for long-lasting effects. One reason it might be tight is that if it is busy overworking as a spinal stabilizer due to the abs not showing up enough. This can go along with an overactive posterior diaphragm and paraspinals that can affect posture, breathing mechanics, and core function. Another reason it is holding constant tension due to fighting the forward push on the femur from tight and overactive deep hip rotators. Along these lines, increased tightness can occur when someone is prone to hanging on their hip flexors for support with their hips shifting forward over their feet and in front of their rib cage. So before jumping into strengthening, proximally, we need to address rib cage and diaphragm position and mobility, decrease the paraspinal stiffness, and improve core strength. Distally, you might need to improve the femur position in the socket by improving glute lengthening and function and pelvis position. A tight psoas can also contralaterally rotate and ipsilaterally side bend. So some counter rotation and side bending might need to occur first before working in the sagittal plane. One last thing to consider before strengthening in concentric ranges with moves like loaded hip flexion is that we might need to help it learn how to eccentrically lengthen first. This is where you're focusing on keeping the pelvis or ribcage stable while extending a leg. Leg flags are a great example for this for a lighter load for both abs and hip flexors. That being said, sometimes a higher load can help muscles show up a bit more, so that's where we're going to start today. Reverse Nordics are a great way to work on using gravity to improve core strength and ribcage position while working on creating length distally in the hip flexors. Here you're looking to maintain a good stack of your ribcage over your pelvis as you go into further degrees of knee flexion and increase load against the hip flexors and abs. The idea is to go through the range that you can control coming back up. As I lean back, I'm thinking about maintaining my pubic bone up towards my head and keeping my ribs back. Then, as I come back up, if you think about pushing your legs back, working more of the hip extension from glutes and proximal hamstrings, rather than coming back up from knee extension by pushing your legs into the ground, this will help further down-regulate the stiffness of the hip flexors and increase the activity of the posterior chain. If you get any knee pain or discomfort, you might explore foam rolling your quads before, playing with femur position of either having the legs maybe a little bit wider apart or feet together, knees apart, or decreasing the load. You can unload as you need with bands to improve form, decrease compensations, and allow yourself to go through a greater range. If this still doesn't help, you might need to explore addressing getting the femur back in the socket more first, improving the pelvis position, or exploring limitations in tibial interrotation first. With improving the pelvis position, this can be addressing being an excessive anterior pelvic tilt, so working on finding more proximal hamstrings and glute max and getting into hip extension first. It can also be about improving the pelvis's ability to go into inlet interrotation by doing something like this pelvis smash. Loading tissue through the eccentric range achieves length and strength that can be a key component for helping keep the mobility gained. Improving hip extension range by decreasing hip flexor stiffness will also play a key component for concentric glute function and posture. You can see how it can turn into a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Now that you've gotten some decreased tension and improved pelvis and rib cage position, it's time to work into loaded hip flexion. The psoas works as the primary hip flexors above 90 degrees of hip flexion. So it's important to make sure that you're working that hip flexion strengthening into that range. If you have pain or discomfort going above that 90 degrees, this can highlight the need to address hip impingement mechanics of femur position in the socket or pelvis position. Along those lines, watch out for secondary hip flexors like the TFL are not overworking for a weak psoas. If those hip flexors that attach to the ASIS are overworking, they can pull the pelvis forward over the femur into an anterior pelvic tilt and contribute to hip impingement symptoms. You might need to work on femur or pelvis positioning first more to improve the ability for the hip to go into hip flexion, and work with a lighter load so that the psoas can show up over those other hip flexors. Along those same lines, we can consider how we can use the kinetic chain to help the psoas out until working it more in isolation. So let's go check that out next. Here I'm using a hands and knees position where I'm focusing on pushing through my armpits without dropping my chest to use the serratus to improve ribcage position and core engagement. You're wanting to make sure that your spine and pelvis are neutral throughout the movement rather than overly tucked or overly extended to improve core connection and the position for the femur to move in the socket. I'm unloading my leg and avoiding hip extension compensations by having a foot on a slider as I bring my leg forwards and back. Nothing else should move except for that femur swinging forwards and backwards. This would be great for someone with a wider rib cage or flared forward ribs. Here I'm using lats to help improve rib cage and pelvis stability. This will be great for those who tend to have a rib cage that is shifted back or a chest that's dropped down, and maybe for a pelvis that tends to be in more of a posterior pelvic tilt. When I'm pulling my arms back, I'm thinking about how I'm using the pull to help open my chest and grow taller. You can start off with no added external load for the hip flexors because just by being upright compared to hands and knees, you're increasing the demand on the psoas. However, a band around the foot will not only add load to the psoas, but also reciprocally increase hip extension engagement on the down leg of glutes and hamstrings, which might be needed for added pelvic stability for the psoas to work from. For the last two, the negative of the band is that you're going to have the most tension in end range hip flexion, where the psoas is more isolated but also weaker. Using a cable column for either or a kettlebell for the standing can help create more consistent tension through the entire range. The trade-off for the cable column over a band around both feet, though, is that you'll lose the reciprocal pelvis stability of getting those glutes and hamstrings to kick in as you go into more hip flexion. In the end, what type of load you use will depend on the individual's needs in front of you. I hope this video provided some insights into potential ways to address psoas tightness and weakness. If you found this video useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let us know what you found useful and what other questions you might have. Don't forget to check out some of our other helpful videos that will help complement concepts discussed in this video as well. Are you a movement professional who wants more? Make sure to check out our continuing education courses that are listed in the description below. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.